America is building a wall of fire around the Islamic Republic of Iran, including hundreds of fighter jets, ships, and missiles, with more forces on their way. But when will the next step be taken? Will we need to wait in suspense for another week or even another month while President Trump examines his options and Iran makes more threats? Or are we nearing the end of negotiations and the beginning of action? Will Israel strike Iran on its own? Whatever happens in the next stages, one thing is clear. This time, Iran is not facing limited strikes, but an actual war, a fight to the finish line that will not end until one side or the other has decisively won and the other side has decisively lost. For now, Prime Minister Netanyahu and Trump agreed that the United States will increase the economic and political pressure on Iran's oil exports, while Switzerland will host the next round of negotiations, prompting Iran to thunder and scream that Europe surrendered to Israel. But what is Israel's nightmare scenario? Will Iran fire all the missiles that it has in an attempt to go down fighting? Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host, Yair Pinto, bringing you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel. President Trump said this week that the deadline for the negotiations is the coming month, and another aircraft carrier, the Gerald Ford, has been ordered to this region and will be here in 4 weeks or less. The options that are being offered to the president include striking the nuclear program and the missile launch capability. Large forces are being deployed to give him even more options, and that include the THAAD and the Patriot air defensive systems that are deployed to protect American bases and allies in this region from any Iranian retaliation. The plan taking shape appears to include the decapitation of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps and the regime's apparatus, but not the physical invasion or occupation of Iranian soil. For that, it might be better to rely on the Iranian people themselves. And in Tehran, the 40 days of mourning for the victims of the regime's massacre of protesters in January is just beginning. So the anger at the regime may raise again. The emerging solution is a model of bargaining under fire, a surgical strike against the regime targets that is intended to force the Ayatollah regime to return to negotiating. On the table right now, but with Trump's terms. In their meeting at the White House last Wednesday, Netanyahu warned Trump, even if you sign a deal with Iran, they will not honor it. However, President Trump insisted, let's give this a chance. Despite the dispute, the two agreed that pressure will be applied on Iran regarding the oil sales to China. For their part, the regime is lashing out with furious rhetoric, firing in all directions. For instance, Iran's foreign minister attacked Europe's leaders over the weekend, claiming that they surrendered to Israel, while Switzerland confirmed it will host this week in Geneva the next round of talks between Washington and Tehran that are mediated by Oman. And back home in Iran, the IRGC says that they found the culprits behind the protests, and the world is watching with concern as 2 members of the Baha'i minority were shown in television giving an obviously coerced confession to having organized the protests. Human rights organizations have raised the alarm about systematic persecution of Baha'is in the country, and they say that they could already be getting worse. And TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will close us today on everything that's happening and the diplomatic moves that are planned between the United States and Iran. What are the demands? And how do you negotiate with leaders who shout death to America? In Gaza, the plan now is for the technocratic government to begin its work, as the dismantling of Hamas's weapons will begin as early as March. And this is according to 2 sources in the Peace Council who spoke with the Kan News channel in Israel. The preparations of the IDF and the militias are already visible on the ground, when the first area to be dismantled will be the area under the control of Abu Shabaab's militia in the new Rafah. This is an opposition Palestinian group to Hamas. And meanwhile, an official confirms that Hamas operatives are moving out of the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis and are violating the ceasefire agreement. They are armed, some of them masks, and they are operating in different parts of the hospital, threatening to carry out arrests of patients and transfer weapons. This is only one example of how Hamas is refusing to give up its power, but instead it is demanding to integrate its operatives into the day-after agenda, especially the police apparatus. And elsewhere, the IDF continues to deal with repeated violations of the ceasefire by the Hamas terrorist organization in Gaza, and we'll tell you more about that later in this report. In the northern arena, Hezbollah continues to rehabilitate despite the IDF strikes. And over the weekend, the IDF destroyed weapons depots and launchers in southern Lebanon after attempts to rehabilitate the terrorist infrastructures that were identified, which constitute a violation of the agreement and a risk of the residents of the State of Israel. I'm Yair Pinto. With me today is Mati Shoshani, and this is your Boots on the Ground report, bringing you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel on day 862 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are operating under the control of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. A moment before we start, I want to call on you to keep spreading the truth. Help us reach many people with what's happening in Israel so that they will know how to pray for the situation. You can do that by clicking the subscribe button or by searching for TBN Israel on all the social media platforms, as well as for Yair Pinto and Mati Shoshani. The aircraft carrier Gerald Ford is already on its way to the Eastern Mediterranean, and the Pentagon is completing the ring of fire surrounding Iran. At the same time, THAAD air defensive batteries were deployed to the eastern Jordan area to strengthen regional defenses, including the defenses of the State of Israel and its airspace. So now, everyone is wondering, are we looking at another month of negotiations, or are we counting down to a new military campaign? Let's take a quick look at what's already happening on the ground. The aircraft carrier Lincoln is already operating in this area with nearly 100 F-18s and F-35 aircraft on board, along with destroyers that are carrying long-range cruise missiles and submarines as part of the strike group. At the same time, F-15s, A-10s, F-35 squadrons are being deployed to bases in Qatar, Jordan, Syria, and Cyprus. The Gerald Ford is on its way to provide additional strike power along with additional defensive capabilities in the form of AEGIS-equipped ships for missile interception. Additional missile defenses and ships are already deployed to the strategic points in and around the Persian Gulf. This is along with Patriot batteries that are protecting American bases. This is already a deployment that speaks to a capability for waves of strikes over days and even weeks. And at the same time, Trump is setting a deadline for the talks, apparently in the coming month. He says that he thinks that the talks will succeed, but warns that if not, it will be very bad for Iran and also very traumatic. And amongst the options that are on the table are striking the nuclear program and the ballistic missile launch capabilities, and even pinpointed moves with special forces against certain military targets. Trump is also broadcasting a tough line demanding zero enrichment and talking about the alternative to diplomacy being fear, because that's the only thing that really brings progress. In Israel, this sounds familiar, but also worrying. Prime Minister Netanyahu is expected to convene a security consultation, lay out the options, and receive an update from the heads of the security branches on preparedness. If there will be progress towards a nuclear agreement that excludes ballistic missiles and supports of regional proxies, Israel will keep for itself an option for a military move. If Iran crosses the red lines, Israel will react. From Jerusalem's perspective, the missile threat is a strategic and existential, no less than the nuclear issue. And behind the scenes, Netanyahu warned President Trump directly during their White House meeting on Wednesday that even if he signs a deal with the Ayatollah regime, they will not honor it. Trump reportedly replied, "Let's give this a chance." However, the two did agree on maximum pressure, and the United States will increase the economic and the political pressure on Iran, especially around selling Iranian oil to China, which buys around 80% of the Iranian exports. This is what the diplomats will be looking at as the next round of negotiations open this week in Geneva to be formally mediated by Oman. And according to reports, the White House envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will raise the issues of Iran's ballistic missiles and support for regional terrorist organizations in these talks, while Iran, for its part, is not rushing to concede And there are also reports that it continues to refuse to stop enriching uranium, which is the central point of contention from Washington's perspective. And furthermore, Tehran is also not staying quiet in the narrative space. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi attacked Europe over this weekend, calling these negotiations a circus and claiming that Germany and Europe surrendered to Israeli policy. Other Iranian officials continue to make fiery speeches about how they are ready for any kind of aggression and the price of attacking Iran will be terribly high, and so on and so forth, just like they always do. However, there is something different this time. Inside Iran, the street is boiling with rage as we begin 40 days of mourning for the victims of the regime's massacre of protesters in January, and the anger at the regime may rise again. At the same time, reports are coming in about a manhunt for protesters, raids in homes and workplaces, arrests in the middle of the night, and people disappearing without contact with a lawyer or with a family member. There are reports of use of drones, security cameras, and digital surveillance capabilities, including phone and data and facial recognition, to locate people who participated in the protest and pick them up from the streets. Within this campaign of persecution, the regime is also marketing culprits, including 2 members of the Baha'i minority that were shown on television as they confess, not for real, but confessed to organizing protests, while the families claim everything was forced on them under interrogation by the Revolutionary Guards. The concern there is clear, that these videos are meant to prepare the ground for a harsh verdict in advance. And with all of this in mind, when we hear talk about Washington, about a possible confrontation with Iran, there is no mention of a ground invasion or an occupation of Iran. The understanding is that an invasion would be long, slow, and expensive. So, what is emerging is a model of bargaining under fire that includes surgical strikes against the regime and the security targets to force a return to the table on President Trump's terms. The Americans also seem to understand something else. If this starts, it could be far more severe than what was in the past, with exchanges of blows that drag on. In Israel, we are also preparing for a nightmare scenario of large barrages of missiles that are being fired at us. And according to assessments, Iran's launch capabilities have not changed significantly, but it still has dozens of heavy missiles that have not yet been used. In an extreme scenario, when the regime feels these are its final hours, there could be an especially broad launch, including towards symbolic and non-military targets all across the Jewish state. Israel has a robust and battle-tested defensive system built on layers of protection, including the domestically protected Iron Dome, the David Sling, the Arrow 3, and also American systems like THAAD and Patriot. However, Israel remembers what munitions economics looks like during these barrages and how quickly interceptor stockpiles can erode, bringing enormous pressure on the home front. In the end, all these lines meet one point, with 1 month of diplomacy, while strike and defense forces are already on the field. Now everything depends on the question of whether the talks in Geneva will produce a real agreement or only buy time to prepare better for the military campaign. TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will give us a look at all the diplomatic moves between Washington and Tehran. What are the demands? And how do you even negotiate with leaders who shout death to America? So a moment before we move to Mati, give a click to the share button, pass this content to somebody who wants to know what's happening on the ground. And speaking of reaching far, when people think about supporting the idea of soldiers, they often think about food and meals or barbecues to increase the morale. But what Meir Panim does goes much further. Everything Meir Panim provides is made possible through donations. Donations made at blessed-israel.org. That is where this support begins. Over the past year, tens of thousands of sets of protective gear have been provided, including helmets, vests, and medical equipment. This is personal equipment that stays with the soldier and is ready at home when the call comes. Because people that are giving, again, through blessed-israel.org, more than 150 life-saving drones have been delivered to the IDF, tools that save lives on the battlefield. There are also things that few people talk about: adaptive clothing that allow wounded soldiers to dress themselves with dignity. And when a family loses a son, support comes. That's made possible through bless-israel.org. Every week, full Shiva meals are delivered to the grieving families so they don't have to think about food during their hardest days. Today, donations that are coming through Meir Panim at bless-israel.org help support 500 reservists, families each week, feed 1,500 soldiers every day, and strengthen more than 110,000 soldiers through morale programs. At a time of uncertainty and growing threats, this work matters more than ever. If you want to stand with Israel's soldiers in a real, practical way, go to bless-israel.org. Now let's continue with what's happening on the ground, and we're moving to TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst, Mati Shoshani. So Mati, how do you even negotiate with leaders who shout death to America?
Yair, that is a great question. What are the actual demands, and how do you negotiate with leaders who still chant death to America? So here's the simplest frame. Washington wants a fast, tough deal, and Jerusalem warns that Iran will stall and won't honor it. And at the same time, Tehran is trying to protect its pride and the tools that hold up its deterrence. Inside all of that triangle, a clear model is taking shape. Bargaining under fire. The hottest development right now isn't slogans or speeches, it's the short timeline Trump is setting, and the pressure being built on two tracks at the very same time. Talks and force. Trump is saying plainly, there's a month to reach understandings, and if not, we move to the second stage, and that stage will be very hard for Iran. What it means for viewers right now is simple. Every day that passes pushes everyone closer to a decision point, either a deal on American terms or escalation that's being prepared well in advance. So let's go into the details. In the White House meeting, Netanyahu takes a skeptical line. He tells Trump, even if you sign a deal with Iran, they won't respect it. Trump pushes a different direction. Let's give it a chance. This isn't just a style difference, it's a difference in methodology. And yet, despite the disagreement, they leave with a shared understanding. Increased economic and political pressure on Iranian oil sales with a specific focus on the flow to China. That's where the key number really matters. More than 80% of Iranian oil is sold to China. And if the United States manages to tighten that pipeline, it doesn't just hit revenue, it pressures the regime's ability to pay salaries, to run internal security systems, and sustain its influence network beyond Iran's borders. It's pressure aimed at Tehran's soft underbelly, money, stability, and survival. But that pressure doesn't stand alone. In parallel, the United States is accelerating its military posture in this region. The aircraft carrier Gerald Ford is being pushed east quickly instead of waiting for a normal schedule. The plan is to position it south of Cyprus, about a 2-hour flight from Tehran. The operational meaning is straightforward. The American air power footprint in the region is being doubled, and the military option is no longer theoretical. It becomes part of the talks themselves. And that's exactly the bargaining under fire model you describe in your question, Yair. Not an immediate full-scale war, not a one-off strike for symbolism, but a credible threat built with real operational capability to force the other side back to the table under new conditions. Within that model, there's talk of a surgical strike against regime targets and symbols of control. Not only the classic infrastructure targets, but power centers that hold the system together, command and control, repression mechanisms, and internal security components. The goal is to create focused pain that forces a decision. Now the diplomatic track. Switzerland says it will host the next round in Geneva between Washington and Tehran, with Oman as the mediator. That matters for two reasons. First, it preserves a quiet channel that allows direct and indirect messaging without both sides getting trapped in public honor battles. Secondly, Switzerland becomes the stage where Europe and Switzerland provide neutral ground, while the center of gravity stays in Washington and Jerusalem. At the very same time, Iran's foreign minister attacks European leaders, claiming they surrendered to Israel. That's a message aimed both inwardly and outwardly. Inward, to show the regime isn't bending and no one is dictating to it. Outward, to try to split the Western camp, paint Europe as a weak or as weak, and argue the problem isn't Iran, it's the pressure on Iran. But when you look at the ground reality, the aggressive tone doesn't erase the fact that Tehran is still testing tactical compromises. So what are the demands on the table? Here we see a fundamental gap. Trump wants a short, fast deal he can sell as a historic achievement, without sliding into direct war, but with a clear military option if talks fail. Israel wants the deal to cover more than the nuclear file. From Jerusalem's perspective, it must include ballistic missiles and Iran's regional proxies, because that's where the direct threat to Israel sits. On the other side, the Iranian regime is offering to reduce enrichment, to shrink its stockpile, and expand cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency. But it comes with a clear red line. Don't touch the heart of its deterrence. The heart is the ballistic missile array, along with the ability to activate armed proxies across the region. For Iran, giving up long-range missile capability is seen as humiliation and surrender, and more importantly, as giving up to the regime's life insurance. Now this is where your question hits, Yair. How do you negotiate with leaders who chant death to America? The answer isn't the slogan, it's interest. A regime can't shout, keep its image, and still seek economic relief that reduces internal pressure. That's why Iran's recurring demand is the removal of sanctions to quickly stabilize the economy. Israel, based on past experiences, wants a mechanism where the sanctions sword remains hanging overhead, so it doesn't become a situation of sign, release, then violate. And meanwhile, behind the scenes, there's another layer raising the tension: Iran's preparations for the scenario where talks collapse. Now we're seeing strengthened defenses, concealment of strategic assets, digging of storage sites, and fortification around facilities and ballistic missile storage points. That's not the behavior of a side that feels completely secure. That's the behavior of a side that understands the threat this time may be real. And that's the decision window is very, very short. And at the same time, there are regional players trying to block an American strike. Some countries want Iran weakened, but not defeated, and not replaced by a new regime that could move closer to Israel or trigger an unpredictable regional shift. Now that creates additional indirect pressure on Washington. Not only what you do to Iran, but how it reshapes the Middle East the day after. So where's this going? What's the bottom line? All three sides are entering weeks of decision-making. Trump is holding a carrot and a stick, talks under a deadline, and a growing military posture in the region. Netanyahu is pushing for a broader deal, or for the military option to be real. And Iran is trying to buy time, as always, to protect its pride and avoid concessions on missiles and proxies, while seeking economic relief. And that is bargaining under fire. Economic pressure on oil, political pressure internationally, and a military threat built in a way that cannot be ignored. These are diplomatic moves now lined up on a single axis, with a clock ticking above everyone. This is Mati Shoshani. Back to you, Yair Pinto.
Thank you very much, Mati. That really explains why the situation is so complex and why the political and diplomatic moves of the United States are so careful. By the way, for more analysis on the Middle East, look for Mati Shoshani on social media networks, because there isn't a day that we don't upload more and more content on what's happening here on the ground, and encourage you to pray for the situation. And of course, don't forget to hit the share, leave a comment, and subscribe to TBN Israel on YouTube. Now let's continue. Now, we're shifting our focus to the Gaza Strip, where a terror squad emerged from a tunnel in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip over the weekend and approached an IDF unit with obvious hostile intent. The terrorists were eliminated on the spot, but this is just the latest example of Hamas's blatant violations of the ceasefire agreement. And also over the weekend, there were reports of artillery fire and explosions that were heard by residents in communities near the Gaza envelope, especially opposite the Ashkelon coast, Sha'ar HaNegev, Sdot Negev, and Sderot. So when Hamas is still raising its head from the tunnels and continues to violate the understandings, how do you disarm it? And who will manage Gaza moving forward? The IDF is deployed on the ground, and this is according to the ceasefire outline, but on the ground as well, it's far from quiet. And the IDF has made it clear that every immediate threat gets an immediate response. The disarming of Hamas is supposed to begin already next month, and this is according to two sources in the Peace Council that will convene in Washington, But there is a precondition. A technocratic government in Gaza needs to start working, receive authorities from Hamas, and only then begins the disarmament process. On the ground, preparations are already visible, as not only the IDF but also local Palestinian militias are working in coordination with Israel, and they are preparing for the transfer of authority, and they are the ones who will have to hold territory, enforce order, and confront Hamas from within the Gaza Strip. According to foreign reports, in recent weeks, additional equipment was transferred to them, including rifles and vehicles to help them in their task. The first area marked for disarmament is Rafah. In this area, the new Rafah is supposed to be built, and the one holding control there is the Abu Shabaab militia. There, according to the plan, they will begin disarming Hamas, first of all in the area that is closest to the crossing and most sensitive to Israel. This weekend, the militia revealed for the first time that they are scanning and neutralizing Hamas tunnels themselves. This is not a symbolic action, but very difficult and complicated field work with a clear goal: to break the ability of Hamas to hide and reorganize. At the same time, there is a change on the ground at the Rafah border crossing. Israel is allowing the Abu Shabaab militia to secure those exiting and entering, with the aspiration that they will be the ones to do it on a permanent basis. This is a new model on the ground. Not Hamas at the gate, not anarchy at the gate, but a local armed actor working in coordination with the IDF. But this is exactly where Hamas is trying to cling on. Publicly, it broadcast a readiness to give up the power and transfer authorities to the technocratic committee. But behind the scenes, we see that Hamas demands to integrate its people into the new government, especially those who belong to its police apparatus. According to a Palestinian source, and according to an Egyptian source that is familiar with the moves, Hamas wants to bring thousands of its people into the new system to ensure them salaries and to live with a day-to-day grip on the streets, controlling the grasp of the Palestinian people. The Technocrats Committee opposes this, and Israel and the United States also reject this demand. And furthermore, the Technocrats Committee itself is also signaling pressure. Over the weekend, it published an unusual statement against the backdrop of Hamas attempts to limit the transfer of authorities. It said that it will not be able to fulfill responsibility if it is not granted civil and administrative authorities and also control over the police. From their perspective, full control is a condition for international support for rehabilitating the Gaza Strip, for the withdrawal of the IDF, and for returning life to order. And meanwhile, according to those same reports, it still has not been possible for committee members to actually enter Gaza in practice, raising questions about how effective they can be moving forward. And that brings us to the central question from Israel's perspective about Hamas's disarmament. On the one hand, there is a deadline for March, but on the ground, Hamas continues to use force, and it does it also from places that are supposed to have been cleared. For instance, over the weekend, the NGO Medicines Sans Frontières announced it is pulling all non-essential medical teams out of the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis out of concern for the safety of the staff because of the presence of armed Hamas terrorists in the hospital. According to the statement, in recent months, armed men were observed, some masked, operating in different parts of the hospital. The organization's message was clear: hospitals must remain neutral. From Israel's perspective, this is another sign of a method. Hamas does not disappear. It just changes uniforms, changes locations and methods, and tries to remain sovereign, even as around it an alternative mechanism is being built. And within all of this, IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir toured Rafah over the weekend, saying, "We are not giving up the war objective of full disarmament of the Gaza Strip and dismantling Hamas of its weapons. We achieved an unprecedented achievement. All of Hamas's frontline battalions were destroyed. Hamas was militarily defeated, and all the hostages were returned to their homes." And in the same breath, he emphasized that the IDF will operate according to the guidance of the political echelon, holds the decision plans, and is ready to act offensively as required. This is what the struggle over the day after looks like now. On the ground, a timeline for disarming already is in March. Rafah first, then local forces that begin to neutralize tunnels and take positions at the gates. On the other hand, Hamas is trying to remain tough in police, in public institutions, and through violations of the ground of what's happening, and they remind everyone that the organization is still here. And the coming weeks will be the real test. Will this armament begin on time, or will Hamas manage to turn the day after into another form of Hamas rule under a different banner? And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development on the issue and bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel. And for more content, make sure to search for TBN Israel on social media platforms. Make sure to hit the subscribe button. Make sure to look for Yair Pinto and Mati Shoshani and only follow official accounts. It's very important for us to share the truth so that you will know how to pray for the situation. And now we are switching our focus to the northern arena, because over the weekend the Air Force opened a wave of strikes in southern Lebanon. Reports emerged of strikes at several points, including Wadi Bararaz, Iklim Tufa, Khomeini and Basila, and also in the areas of Rina and Kfar Millah. So, why is this happening now? And what is the price if Hezbollah manages to rehabilitate one more layer of infrastructure before the system tightens? The IDF says that the attempts to rehabilitate the terrorist infrastructure are ready, and this is a red line. Any movement that pushes Hezbollah forward again, even if it is quiet, is considered a violation and a risk to the residents of the Galilee. Therefore, these strikes do not look like a pinpointed event, but enforcement of the ceasefire arrangements. And speaking of which, recent reports indicate that south of the Litani River, close to the border with Israel, Hezbollah is much weaker than what it was before the ceasefire, but they are trying to get back to work. They are being pushed more and more into built-up areas, while Israel operates with a policy of zero containment, carrying out short-range to demolish threats and get out quickly. Within one of these operations, the scope of the remaining weapons was also exposed in the village of Kafra. About 1,300 Grad rockets were discovered and demolished. This demonstrates why the IDF treats any rehabilitation attempt as an immediate threat. And in another operation, a wanted senior figure named Atawi was pulled in the middle of the night from his bed in the village of El Arukba in southern Lebanon and transferred for interrogation in Israel. This is an area where Israeli forces did not operate throughout the first period of the fighting in the north, but there is still an ability to reach, to locate, and to extract live targets. And furthermore, the IDF is also operating in southern Syria, where within the walls of the building, in a village near the border, weapons were hidden, so they'll be ready when a terrorist decides to attack Israel again. And according to the report, communication equipment, weapons, and also mines were amongst the equipment that the IDF forces found and demolished at the site, and this incident connects to another fact on the ground. The smuggling routes from Syria are being hit along with the production capability, but Hezbollah is still playing cat and mouse with what it has left, disappearing, storing, moving from place to place, and trying to lower its signature. Here the big Lebanese question comes in. Who is supposed to dismantle all of this? The internationally recognized government in Beirut declared a clear red line that all weapons must be in the hands of the state. Here, the Lebanese National Army enters the picture, also through a joint oversight mechanism with American involvement and coordination on the ground. But everyone knows that the Lebanese National Army is not very capable. It collects weapons, but does not always destroy everything. Or it does not deal strongly enough with tunnels and with bunkers. In Israel, they speak about mapping of several dozen bunker sites south of the Litani River, close to the border with Israel, and about ongoing pressure that the Lebanese army reach them and deal with them. When that doesn't happen, the Air Force is hitting these targets themselves, the Israeli Air Force. Hezbollah, for its part, is changing its deployment. The Radwan forces, which was an elite unit planned for an invasion of Israel, underwent a professional conversion to defense. What remains of it was pushed north to the Lebanon-Syria border area near Beirut to protect areas that the organization needs and routes for smuggling weapons. Alongside it operates the Badr unit, which is defined as one controlled that the area of the Litani, north of the Litani River. This is a new strategy involving less immediate offensive planning, more an attempt to buy time to survive and to recover. And meanwhile, Iran continues to funnel money to Hezbollah through Turkey. The salary of a Hezbollah operative is around $500 a month on average, about twice the salary of the Lebanese army. And meanwhile, the IDF continues to strike senior Hezbollah leadership even in Beirut. This is a reminder that anyone trying to manage rehabilitation from behind, even in the capital, is not necessarily protected. Therefore, as the clock ticks under disarming and dismantling of Hezbollah, Israel is also holding a layer of physical defense. 5 outposts inside southern Lebanon. In the Northern Command, they know the challenge is not only to strike, but to return the residents to the north, give them a sense of security, so they come home, live, work, and feel secure. And amidst all of this, the big question remains, if the United States strikes Iran, will Hezbollah choose to open a front to save the axis, or will it decline to be dragged into a new conflict when it still hasn't recovered from the last one? And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development on this issue. So keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. And most importantly, pray. Pray for wisdom to our leaders, to your leaders. Pray for the IDF soldiers and their allies all across this region. We have so many good men and women that came here to stand against these evil regimes. Let's pray for them to have peace of heart, to make the right decisions, and to be safe. Let's pray for the peace of Jerusalem.